Good morning, everyone. So you'll have to excuse me because I'm coming down. I have this. You know how you wake up in the morning and you know that you're in for a real shit. Well, not that. You're in for a real treat. You feel that something is really, really wrong. You have a sore throat. Your nose is running a little bit, and you just know that your body is ramping up to punish you severely over the coming days. That's where I am right now. But I'm still gonna have to go to the gym because today I'm learning how to crawl, and no exceptions. Unless I am deathly sick, I never ever miss a training session. If I can take my first belt in kickboxing with high fever and still make it through, even though I vomited during the ordeal, I can do this. And I can also never miss to make a video, as I said, unless I am deathly ill. So in this video, just bear with me, because we're going to talk about JavaScript. Something that is easy, and so I can save my throat. Anywho, what do I mean by talking about JavaScript? Well, I had probably the biggest question I have ever received on this channel posted to me just the other day. A subscriber asked me, so Frederick, how do I think the JavaScript way? And I know what all the naysayers are going to say now. Oh, you don't think about it. And then, Mark, if you're watching this, I know that that's something along the lines of what you would say to me if I said something. And don't you even try to pretend that you didn't make it like a crack or anything at this. Anywho, that's a very big question, as you can imagine. How do you think the JavaScript way? Well, as somebody who has spent a lot of time with JavaScript, I can tell you that there are a few approaches and a few tips and tricks that I can give you that are not necessarily the JavaScript way to do things, but they are my way of doing JavaScript. And I can only say that it's worked very well for me, and I hope the same will be true for you. So first and foremost, we have to define something. The problem with thinking the JavaScript way is that you have it's such a massive question. Like it's like asking how do I perceive how do I become skilled, or how do I learn all the things that it takes years to learn. It's so I'll just have to touch on the things that I think are most important when working with JavaScript. So let's make a distinction first and foremost. If you are using vanilla JavaScript and if you're using a framework. If you are using a framework, you should try to understand the way that it works in that framework, or the way, there's a style of working that you should abide by when you're using a framework. So let's take React, for example. There's a lot of conventions and a lot of ways that you do different things in React, and you should try to abide by them, because if you've already bought into using a framework, then the biggest benefit for you is to try to do things in accordance to that framework. I see people who kind of ignore this, and that doesn't make sense to me, because if you want a consistent way of producing results and you have a framework, then that's kind of what you're getting. Like you don't pick a framework because you want maximum customization or maximum freedom as a programmer. You pick a framework because it allows you to have a set of rules, or a sandbox, basically, where you can if you just follow the conventions in how things are working, how work in this type of framework, you will produce a pretty good project, right? You don't have to be like a master programmer or anything like that to produce decent results. So when somebody uses something like React and they still go and do their own thing, I kind of go, well, what's the point of React? So that's one part of the discussion. And then you have vanilla JavaScript. Now, The tips I'm going to give you here is not necessarily just for vanilla JavaScript, but I have found them to be universally true for JavaScript. So the first and foremost thing you need to know about JavaScript is that you can never trust anything that comes into your code. Because JavaScript is a loosely typed language, you will find that three things are in general your biggest problems. Number one, you don't get what you expect. You for whatever reason, something's coming into your function or your code or something like that you don't really know what the shape of the data is. So what I've learned to do, especially this is usually true for any type of network calls or anything like that. What I always will do is that I will declare now in ES6 there are classes, but usually I had functions back in the day that kind of worked as classes anyway, or constructors if you will. And what I will do is that I will take in the value of the data that I'm getting in a function, and that function is responsible for basically in a safe manner extracting the information that my code needs to execute its logic. And if it doesn't find the thing it's looking for, it will log out an error, throw an error or something like that, but still return defaults. In other words, it's just a map. It's the same type of think of it as if you're working on the server. You have serializers. When somebody posts form data or JSON to your server and you're working in a typed language, you declare a model, some type of incoming model that your code can serialize the JSON into. It's the exact same idea in JavaScript. It's just that you do it for everything. Anything that's coming from the server or wherever you're getting your data. Because what happens then is that you reduce the amount of bugs, or the most common bug that JavaScript has that you can reduce by quite a lot by having this approach that you always have the mentality that you don't trust what's coming to you. You map it over to something where if it's there, it's going to produce the correct results, and if it's not there, you're going to have a default. What happens is that you reduce that good old try to access something of undefined bug by quite a lot, and that helps a lot. That's number one. Number two with JavaScript, which is a big problem, is when you understand how difficult it is to manage state management and having different components that talk to each other and kind of needing to basically managing state overall. The best way I've found to manage state in JavaScript is to use something like Redux. It doesn't have to be Redux. I usually, depending on how hardcore I want to be, either I use, as I said, I usually use a framework when I work professionally, because it's unreasonable to ask of everybody I work with to have it's what I've always argued when you work in a team. You can't do all the fancy high level super engineering stuff that you may think is really, really cool and really, really perfect. You have to cater to the common denominator, or the people who may be highly skilled but not masters of JavaScript. So usually using a framework is the way to go. But if for some reason you decide that you want to go outside a framework, having something like Redux or making your own Redux implementation is extremely powerful. I actually argue that right now Redux is probably the best state management system that we have in JavaScript. So that's number two. And lastly, the biggest problem with JavaScript is that you have an issue with the global namespace. You have an issue with keeping your code clean, if you will. And that's where I apply what I call library-oriented development. So you should today not, and I really mean this, if you can avoid it, you should try to avoid as much as humanly possible to keep all your JavaScript in one big file or anything like that. Use a bundler such as Webpack, for example. And I know that HTTP 2 is around the corner, and JavaScript modules or ES6 modules. So there are other things that are happening that will solve this problem for you. But in general, what you want to start thinking about is in terms of modules and libraries. So what I will do is that whenever I have a concept, a component, anything that I'm building that uses JavaScript, I will create a directory think of it as node modules. If you're using node modules, go into the directory of your node modules and just follow that pattern. It works very, very well. You just declare a directory with the code that is responsible for doing the stuff that you're trying to build right now. And everything that you need in order to execute that function and so forth, the index.js file, that is a convention in Node.js then, you simply use that as an entry point to your library or your module, and then you use it as any other dependency you would, like a Node module. And that's what I mean by library-oriented development. Like, you don't do this traditional thing, because I see this all the time. I think it's hilarious that we have all these packages that we depend on in our project, but we don't structure our own code in the same way as we would a library, even though a library is the most portable and isolated way that you can build a module. And most of the time you actually have that. Like, you don't think about it, but you're actually building a module. So those are my 3 tips for thinking the JavaScript way. First and foremost, never trust anything. Always have a mapping layer or a serializer, something that just takes a value, checks if it has what you need, and then returns a default or the value if it finds the value. Lodash's get function is like my favorite function of all time. Second thing is state management. Use something like Redux to manage your state, or build your own Redux implementation. You can look into pub/sub, for example. That's just a programming pattern. And thirdly is to start thinking in terms of libraries or node modules when you develop your code, instead of creating like some custom thing that, whatever you want to call it. These are probably my biggest 3 tips that I can give to somebody who wants to get good at JavaScript. And then of course I have like 100 other tips, but I have plenty of videos on these topics if you're interested. And yeah, that's basically it. Have a great day.